Hi everybody, welcome to the Governance Made Easy webinar series titled this one, How to Run and Manage Board Committees or Committees in General. Today we are having a discussion with our very special guest, Margot Foster, supported on the panel by Stephen Bowman and Linda Carroll. My name's Sean McDonald and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 odd minutes. And firstly, thank you for attending today. We always appreciate the effort you make to be here as part of our live events. And during the session, if you have any questions for Margot or our panel, please use the Q&A button, please, on your toolbar. We'll be answering these as we go and try to get through as many of these questions as we have time for. And finally, this is the best bit. If you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering a really short 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go in the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those a little bit unfamiliar with Board Pro, we are a board software provider, sometimes called a board portal, and we serve around 25,000 users around the globe, and we enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So I'm going to hand over to the team now, starting with Margot, to introduce themselves. Over to you, Margot.
Oh, thank you, Sean, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Margot Foster, and I have been doing governance for a very long time. I started when I was on committees at uni and have continued ever since. And these days, not only do I continue to be on lots of boards, or have been on lots of boards, I do consulting in governance through my business, Boardroom Excellence. Thank you.
Excellent. Over to you, Linda.
Oh, thank you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Tararoa, ta maunga, ko Kairangi, te awa, ko Linda Carroll, tōku ingoa. It's great to be here today. I'm a Chartered Fellow of the Institute of Directors. I have 25 years governance experience. I'm Chief Executive of Align Group, and we specialise in aligning strategy, governance, culture and performance. And finally, I'm an accredited foresight practitioner through the Institute for the Future in California. So I'm looking forward to Margot's insights today.
Thanks, Linda. And finally, Stephen, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Steve Bowman from Australia, but currently in sunny Auckland. Been working with boards for literally decades, and in particular chairs and senior executive teams. And one of my great joys in life is being able to share the insights and the wisdom from some of the smartest people that I've had the pleasure of working with, and to then make this available, make these insights available to all who are interested in listening. So look forward to this, and looking forward to sharing this with Margot.
Thanks, Steve. Now, before Margot kicks off, I'm told that she likes to skip through some of her slides from time to time. So if you see something you like and we skip past it, don't panic. Yell out and put your hand up, and we'll try to back the truck up a little bit. All the slides after the webinar will be made available to you, of course, so don't panic. So over to you, Margot.
Oh, thank you, Sean. I'm very much looking forward to this session with Linda and Steve, experts in their field. The slides that I've prepared are fairly info heavy, but they're designed to be a resource. But as Sean says, any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. So today's session is about board committees. So I thought I'd start off with a couple of definitions which are there for you to read, and I'm sure you all know what they are. So there's one from the AICD and one more generally from Wikipedia. I don't think I need to read them as they're self-explanatory, but it's really important, I think, as we all agree, that committees are properly constituted, properly managed and properly wound up, shall I say, when their use is no longer required. Steve, Linda, any other comments on the committees that you've seen and worked with and overstayed welcome, perhaps?
the more the more I see and the more I'm around, the more I realise that committees should have to be fit for purpose. So, back in the days, we used to say there were 3 committees that the board should have. Now we're actually saying you need to have the committees that you need to have to do the work that needs to be done. And so, we're now finding hybrids of committees being put together that really reflect the focus of that particular organisation and the board, that can support the board in its role in making the choices that create the future. So I'm really interested in this conversation because more and more I'm seeing some innovative uses of committees, including task forces, and those organisations that try and follow the trend of what committees should put in place are really missing out a great opportunity of actually making things more fit for purpose for them. Margot.
I think that's key, fit for purpose. Linda?
Yeah, like one of the things that I have found is the interesting committees that you get really dependent on the entity. And so in the not-for-profit sector, you often will find sponsorship and fundraising committees, for example. When I was on the New Zealand Army Leadership Board, we had a future operating environment a subcommittee or committee. And so it is really building on what Stephen's said, that your entity determines what sort of committees you need.
So next slide, please, Sean. So just some definitions, and I tend to do this because I'm a lawyer by trade. I can't quite slough off the effects of 34 years in practice. So I start with a couple of definitions. So board is a modern and common term for what used to be called a committee. A lot of smaller organisations still call their boards committees, and indeed under some legislation, committee is the designated descriptor. Committee itself derives from the old Committee of Management, which unfortunately had to do some work with one not so long ago, which is really a hands-on concept where everybody is both trying to lead, be strategic and manage at the same time. And I'm sure we've all seen examples of that absolutely not working. Some organisations use the term commission, and I do a bit of work with international sport, and that's quite a common title for the subcommittees of those councils or congress boards that they have. For our purposes, we'll use the term committee, but it doesn't include, as Steve just said, task groups or otherwise working groups that are constituted for particular purposes and which can be really useful instead of having formal chartered committees. I don't think there's anything probably we need to add to that. Next one, please, Sean. So going back to the types of committees, and I think Steve and Linda have just touched on the fact that they need to be fit for purpose and created to deal with the issues as and when they arise. They entirely depend on the size, business and nature of the organisation. And I've got those common ones there: audit, risk, finance. Sometimes they're standalone, increasingly they're combined. Often nominations, remuneration, they too can be combined, but others might be industry specific as set out there. I have to say, I always wonder about governance committees per se. It's really governance as a whole of organisation activity rather than hiving off certain things to a governance committee. I don't know whether Steve, Linda, you have any views on those sorts of committees?
There's a common term, and sorry, Linda, you first.
I was just going to say, I've never come across a governance committee. I've come across strategy committees, but not governance.
Oh yes, yeah. Quite often they're governance. Sorry, you go, Steve.
The governance committees are still relatively common, but even more common is what's happening now is people are starting to change it to actually give them descriptors that describe what they do. So the most common one I've seen in the last couple of years that has appeared is what they're calling people, culture, nominations and remuneration, PC&R. Oh, yeah. Why? Because they deal with people, they deal with the culture, they deal with remuneration, and so the more a committee can actually describe what it does. So, for example, one of the things, I haven't seen it happen yet, but I'd love to see it happen. I'd love to see a committee called Strategic Finance and Risk and Audit, rather than just straight out finance and risk and audit. So that if we start looking at the descriptors of what it is that we actually want our committees to do, they're not there to do the work of the staff or make sure the staff are busy. They're actually there to do some heavy lifting in particularly the high level things that the board has to get its head around.
So
Yeah.
I noticed that Alan has made a comment that governance committees are often policy committees. Is that your finding, Margot, or what do governance committees, as I say, I haven't come across this term, which is really interesting. What are they focusing, doing deep dives into?
Well, quite often they're responsible for policy reviews. You know, so
Yeah.
policies will come to the governance committee and then be reviewed before they then go to the board for
Okay, so same
review.
as policy committees, yeah.
Well, it is a bit, and they're otherwise charges, and I've got a comment later on about governance committees being responsible for revising constitutions, which I
Yeah.
think is a really, really bad idea. But
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
The definition I would use for the governance committees, and we still see quite a few of them in Australia and in some other jurisdictions as well, but the key role of anything like a governance committee really should be to look after the two key assets of their organisation. And the two key assets are the board itself and also the chief executive. And if you look at from that perspective, the role of any governance committee is to make sure that we have the skills in place, that we monitor those skills, both the board and CEO, that we have in place a performance framework for the board and the CEO, the induction program for the board and the CEO, the ongoing performance management frameworks that need to be put in place, all those sorts of things. And mostly that's missing from so many boards, that high performance framework for the board itself and the CEO.
So that's, yeah. So those things I see under other committees. So it's, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
So yeah, a definitional question. But yeah, so sometimes nominations committees do those same roles.
We have a couple of questions, Margot.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's Margaret's question about technology. Yes, I mean, as we've said, fit for purpose, whatever you need for your organisation. Is a steering group interchangeable? Oh, hang on, they're disappearing. Is a steering group interchangeable with a committee? It depends. Like the answer to everything in governance is it depends. I think we all know that. I define a steering group perhaps or as a task group or a working group as something that is established for a purpose, a time and purpose limited activity, and then it's disbanded. Whereas a committee is a standing committee, a standing a construct that is ongoing and is populated by different people from time to time.
And Margot, building on that question, in New Zealand, we have a number of organisations that are now setting up internal governance frameworks for within the organisation, not to do with external board governance, and they often call themselves steering committees. So I'm wondering if that might be what Amanda is referring to. I can't remember where, Amanda, you're from, but that is there's a proliferation of these governance committees internal to organisations, and they're mostly called steering committees or steering groups.
An innovation from New Zealand.
Well, I don't know if it's a great innovation or not. People find it very challenging trying to wear their operational hat and still anyway.
Yes. So Edie's question, yes, this is the Corporations Act from Australia.
We have the Companies Act.
Yes. It's excerpted for discussion purposes. This act, which will be reflected in other jurisdictions around the world about the what the prescription is under that particular act, and it basically comes down to delegation, but delegation doesn't absolve directors from responsibility for the acts or advice that they then act on. So there's plenty of cases where the failure to interrogate the information that comes from a committee can lead directors into trouble. Steve, Linda, any comments on the Corps Act? No? Okay, next one, Steve. Sean, sorry. So the source of authority is that the starting point is that all power and authority rests with the board always and regardless of a delegation to committees, as we've just said. Boards can create committees through that authority via the Constitution or the relevant act. Creating the committees is an exercise of the board's power to delegate, and there's often an express clause in the Constitution allowing that. But even if there isn't, invariably you can use one of the clauses in the object or purposes clause of your Constitution to give you the power to create committees. So it's a board decision to create a committee, and it's, as I said, an exercise of the power to delegate. So motions, therefore, are required to be recorded in the minutes to establish the committee, approve its charter or terms of reference, whatever language you wish to use, appoint its members from time to time, and wind it up by motion to end the delegation. So any practical insights on that, Steve or Linda?
I think one of the biggest challenges facing organisations when it comes to committee is how much do we put in our constitution, and how much do we put in our regulations. Here's how we go about doing it. And we're just dealing with one at the moment where they have a lot of detail in their constitution about how a committee should function. That's probably not the right place to put that sort of material in. You probably want to keep it enough so that we know that we've got the right to create these committees. If you want to enshrine to make sure that you have certain types of committees, you might specify some of them, but that is probably not a great idea either. But in this one I'm thinking of in particular, it's something like 14 pages of a 30-page constitution about here are the roles, the rules and the regulations for committees. And that's probably better off into a rules and regulations document rather than actually being in the Constitution.
Oh, I think so. I mean, if you want to change how your committees are going to work, and that might be particularly cumbersome with 14 pages out of 30, then you've got to take it to a general meeting of some sort to amend it with all the hassle and expense that involves. So I think a simple delegation is really all that's required. Emily's got a question here. What are your thoughts on board members being able to see all board committee papers in the board software they use? I'll go to you.
Question.
I mean, any board member that can come along to, in my understanding, can come along to any committee. They don't have to be a member of the committee to attend. And so I think that it's fine for them to see all of the papers.
Yeah,
Steve?
I mean, there's different views on this one, because sometimes you get ex officio, you can attend all meetings, all that sort of stuff, and they either do or they don't. But I'm getting more the thinking from boards that if they want a director to come, then they invite the director, or the director actually asks permission to attend that board meeting. They can't just rock up to it as such. Now, it's not legislated anywhere along those lines, but it's really the process and protocols in place. The key thing I think behind this is that having very clear terms of reference about who actually sits on the committee. The chair often has the right to attend all committee meetings, but the key part of that question was committee minutes going to the board. My view is that committee minutes should be made available, but they're a paper for noting, and I'm not actually that interested in reading the committee minutes. I want to know what are the two issues that they want us to grapple with as a board. So I would rather see, other than committee minutes, I don't mind seeing a link to the committee minutes if I wanted to go in and read them, but I would like a report from that committee, not about what they've done. That's their job. What I want to know is what I should be focusing on as a director that this committee is adding value to in terms of keeping me focused or giving me background or providing a discussion paper. So they can add even more value rather than just reporting on their activity, but reporting against the strategic issues that is worthy of board attention.
Yes, I think reporting to the board, and there's a slide in this deck on that, is really critical. After all, it is a delegation. Usually committees, and I think there's a question about decision making, but committees don't make decisions unless they've been specifically given that authority. Sometimes they are, rarely. Linda, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the question wasn't about minutes. It was about the papers that go to the committee and whether or not board members should be locked out of those papers, committee papers, or whether they should be able to access them if they wish. And so, yeah, what's your view on that, Steve?
Access to committee papers. I mean, the committee has a job to do. It's been given a job to do, and it needs to do stuff in there. If a board member is interested enough in what that committee's doing, join the committee. Rather than
maybe they don't want to join the committee, but there's something that the committee is going to be discussing, and they want to go along to that particular meeting, and they've talked to the chair and said they want to go along, and they can. I mean, I just think
that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think to the point about having being able to read the minutes. Yes, of course. I don't think that should be prevented. A director should be prevented from doing so. After all this, it is their delegation and responsibility to know that the committees are performing and doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So there's Anonymous has a question here. Confusion when the board meetings roll around where so the CEO delivers a committee report as their CFO report to the board, or whether they're supposed to step out of the committee and present a more holistic exec report as CFO. So I guess
why would the CFO be presenting a committee report?
It might be just a matter of expedition that the CEO does it because he or she was there. And it's just part of the report. But this is one of the sort of questions that boards need to ask in meetings about why are we doing it this way? Are we getting the information that we need? And rather than saying, well, this is why it's always been done, because we can, always change it to say, no, we want that to be a separate report by someone who's not a paid member of staff, who's not going to perhaps pass information in a particular context, if that's the implication of that question. So I think ask the question and say, is this in the best interest of us as directors understanding the business of this committee and changing it up if needs be?
See, Marco, wouldn't it be the chair of the committee that would report back to the board normally?
Well, yes, but maybe it's an independent chair who doesn't attend meetings. Could be that. Yes, but otherwise I'd agree with you. If they were all directors and the CEO and CF attended, then you would expect that one of the directors who wasn't a paid employee would do the reporting, I think. Steve, would you agree?
Yeah, no, and you raise the interesting issue of an independent chair. I mean, I know quite a number of organisations that have created the role of independent chair of their nominations and remuneration committee because they want to see it as as not a club. It's actually managed by someone with great experience in those areas in terms of the chair, and then the report comes from the committee rather than from the chair as such. And then they make sure that they pull out for that the items that are necessary for board discussion. And if they want that independent chair to provide some sort of insight or commentary that can't be done on paper, then they invite them for that part of the meeting.
Yeah.
Again, we're coming back to where we started, fit for purpose. You've got to make this work. And what we've found with some boards is that they try these things out. And if it works for them, they keep it. And the smart ones, if it doesn't work, they change it again.
Exactly. Keep it moving, as Sean is asking us to do. Keep on moving. So why have committees? I think we all know why we have committees, but these are just some of the reasons. Obviously, time, expedition, workload, for all the purposes we've discussed. Next one, Sean. Reason for establishing committees, again, specialisation and expertise, efficiency via delegation. Obviously, the board can't do everything in the time it has to meet, nor would it want to. Allows for in-depth analysis from time to time of particular matters for the purpose of strategy and information back to the board that perhaps best comes from a committee rather than necessarily the CEO or staff. Next one. Obviously, for risk management and compliance, that's really important. And I think so many boards these days have finance/audit/risk committees in various combos. You can get expertise, both internal and external. And I think that the balance of who's on is really important. And you can also encourage stakeholders to be engaged, and also potentially have external people on your committees as well, obviously not representing their interests.
Margo, I think that point is really underdone by many boards. They really don't look at the stakeholder engagement or the independent directors to actually add value. And it's one of the best ways of actually really upskilling the board in areas where, if it's a professional board of professions or a board of tradies or whatever it might be, but you can upskill them through the quality of people that you can bring onto your subcommittees or onto your committees as well. So this whole notion of stakeholder engagement, I think, is well worthy of board attention, particularly when it comes to their committee structure.
Yep, quite right, Steve. Next one, thanks. Yeah, succession, which follows on what Steve just said. Accountability, complexity and change, nimbleness that might elude the whole board, and also about continuous improvement at the forefront of identifying areas for change. And one of the things boards do is become quite stultified sometimes in their behaviour about how they do things and why they do the things that they do. So charters or terms of reference, whatever language you wish to include, name of the committee, the objectives of the organisation, the purpose and scope of the committee. And I think that's really important to make sure, as and Steve was talking about the name of the committee before, but what its purpose is. Sometimes if you don't define it clearly enough, there can be sort of mission creep. The number of members and their roles, such as chair, member, CEO, and sometimes staff, the skills of members that you need, and the source of the members, whether they're just directors, whether they're directors of independence, or a combination. And I haven't got stakeholders on there, but we've just talked about that too. So I said, whatever you need to meet the purpose of your organisation. How the chair is appointed, and ideally, on this instance, it's appointed by that board, not the committee itself, because unlike a board where the board might elect the chair, it's not appropriate for a committee because this is the delegation.
It's interesting, if I can just say here, Margo, I've also seen some nuances around this as well too. So I'm thinking of one in particular where some organisations, they split the role of chair and president.
Yes.
And as part of that, the chair manages the work of the board, but also they are able to look to see who are the best possible chairs for the committees as well. So I've seen some organisations where the members elect the board, the board from amongst itself elects the chair, and the chair then appoints the chairs of the committees, which is, again, there's no right way or wrong way, but it's whatever works. And someone's asked the question in the commentary. There's, how do we measure the performance of our committees? Well, the real performance measure there is to ask the directors of the board: is this committee doing what it is that we need them to do to help us do our job?
Yeah, and I guess that's right. So part of what you can put on your board calendar would be review performance of committees. Not that I've ever seen it, but I've just thought it's probably a good idea to do an annual or biannual review, depending on the nature of the committee, to say how is it performing, and perhaps set up what's probably a bit hard to set up a universal assessment tool, but nonetheless, are we getting the information that we need? Is this committee just meeting for the sake of meeting, which is the last thing you want to have a committee doing, Linda?
Yeah, I agree. I'm just looking at someone, the anonymous attendee has said, should there not be terms of reference determined by the board which details objectives, etc., of the proposed committee? And that's exactly my experience. And then it's possible for the board to determine how well the committee is meeting those objectives, as you say, Margo. So
Yes.
Thanks, anonymous, whoever you are.
Yes, well said. I think also the terms of members, length of term, and number of terms, just like the board, sometimes this isn't included. Meeting frequency, ideally not fewer than, rather than sort of mandating a specific number. And I was doing some work with the board at the weekend, and they have eight board meetings a year and 11 finance committee meetings. So yes, had a bit of a conversation about that. Voting, who votes, whether you have a chair has a casting vote, and increasingly chairs don't have casting votes. How the committee is to be serviced, such as having a minute taker who's not a participant, maybe a member of the staff, and the information flow to the committee, what, from whom, and when. So all those things need to be incorporated into your terms of reference. Anything I've missed there?
No, but I did have a question, Margot, in that more and more we're not going down a voting track unless there's a specific requirement to vote. So more and more here, we're finding that boards are taking a consensus route, and if there's issues, then they may move to a vote. But in their terms of reference, they define what consensus is very clearly, and what to do if you don't agree, and the steps with that. But the whole moving and seconding and taking votes is becoming less frequent and yes, less common. I'm interested in your thoughts about that.
Oh no, look, I would agree. I just think it's prudent to include that in case there is. But you rightly make the point that consensus approach to decision making is where most boards are trending and have been heading for some time. So the charter, terms of reference, general terms of reference, including conditions, conflicts of interest, to act honestly in the best interest, the same sort of duties that apply to directors. Exercise due care and diligence and act in good faith and for a proper purpose. Review the charter and its membership regularly and include, as I said before, the review of the charter in the board calendar. Anything to add to that, Steve?
Just a practical insight for people. When you're reviewing your board committees, the best question to ask, quite honestly, is of each of the directors is to say, is this committee doing what it is that you need them to do so you can do your job properly? And that takes the focus of away from how busy is the committee into what are the outputs, the outcomes that the committee is providing you that enables you as a director to do what it is that you need to do. And sometimes we get lost in the weeds. You know, the committee's so busy doing a whole lot of stuff and then they report religiously back to the board. But at the end of it, are they helping me do my job as a board member? I'm not too sure because it's not clear what it is they're asking of us.
I'll just go to Amir's question. As part of the discussion, can you give us points on how we assess effectiveness of committees, KPIs and any pitfalls associated? So I think we've sort of touched on that about the reference point. And reviews. Jennifer's question, dissolving committee. I think so long as you dissolve it by resolution, it's been created by resolution. So by having a board resolution to dissolve it, wind it up, then I think that is sufficient, that it's recorded in that fashion. Any other comments on that, Linda or Steve?
I just saw a really interesting question come through, or a comment sort of in between, where, wouldn't an independent director, an independent chair be asked to come along to a board meeting and give a verbal report? Don't get me started on verbal reports. It really should be done through the reporting mechanism and highlighting to the board from that committee what it is that committee would like the board to tackle, what they'd like to, and you don't need a verbal report on that because it should have already been specified in what it is that you're expecting from the board coming from it. So I don't think it's very helpful to have anything that even remotely looks like verbal report as part of your agenda. If we need to talk about something, then it's a paper for discussion. If we don't need to talk about it, don't open that door.
Yep, I think that's right. So let's just keep moving on. We can come back to the questions as they keep rolling in. So committees submit reports and make recommendations to the boards as per the charter or express instruction or direction from the board, whether it's report minutes. If a committee is empowered to make decisions, then that delegation needs to be considered with care by the board and expressed with equal care in the charter. And as I said before, it's really important to avoid mission creep, e.g. a nominations committee taking on constitution review matters. You've selected a group of people to do a nominations role. You haven't selected them to do what is effectively a governance, a specific governance type role. So, Steve, any thoughts on that one?
So I was reading questions
Oh no, that's all right. It was just on sort of mission creep and making sure that the committee sort of stays on song. Linda?
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that it does need to be very clearly set out. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things is I did a session just last week about committees the board should never have. And I may upset some people with this, but there are certain committees I've seen that just don't work at the board level. Strategy committee is one of them.
Yeah.
Because what I've seen in the organisations that put up strategy committees that report to the board, the first 12 months they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And then the next 3 years, they're busy doing detailed stuff that really they don't need to be doing because strategy is an overall board discussion. So there's certain committees that you just got to ask yourself, just because it's got a governance sounding name to it, is it actually adding value to what we're doing? I've seen one recently where they pulled together a stakeholder engagement committee of the board. This committee worked for them because they had a 10-year time frame around key stakeholder engagement to prepare themselves for possible futures, as opposed to the sort of stakeholder engagement that the staff do, which is, getting together and making sure we can work together. This was a much more strategic framework around it. And they've actually created that as an ongoing board committee because it's adding huge value to the board in expanding their horizon and the decision making that they're making so that they're future proofing.
I just have found with strategy committees is that the strategy committee basically ends up having to do all of the work all over again when they get to the board, because the board wants all of the information and all of the detail, and
Yep.
that, and I mean, it's a fundamental purpose of the board. So they're not about to take their hands off the steering wheel, really.
Yeah, and also it doubles up the management time as well. Scarce time management who have to manage the strategy committee and manage the strategy at the board, as well as doing everything else. I mean, I've seen the same thing, and I agree. They sound like a good idea, but perhaps really aren't.
There's a great question in there, Margot, about what role does a company secretary typically play in committees? And I think it's worthy of mentioning this one because the role of company secretary has changed dramatically in the last probably 5 years. But if you are appointing a company secretary, and many of us have to, then give them the support and the training so they can do their job properly. So, we've appointed a company secretary. Okay, have they got the skills, the training and the support to do what's actually needed? Because a good company secretary is worth their weight in gold. It could be a staff member who has that as a function, but train them up so they can do it properly rather than just assuming.
I'd say the other side of that topic too is for the board to understand what the role of the company secretary is. And half the time it's never explained. That person sort of exists over there, executing and delivering certain functions, but never explained to the board, nor does the board understand the value that person can have. So that's another thing to add, to the perhaps do induction for new directors is what does the COSEC do? We have touched on reporting and certainly a written report. And one of the things that you really need to do is get the information that you need from the committee that you have asked for, as has been alluded to. Not verbal reports, and certainly not minutes that are written for the benefit of the committee. And I think that's one of the, I remember reading a set once and I thought this is sort of like, this could be, I mean, sounds a bit disparaging, probably am, but it was sort of a mother's club meeting. It really told me nothing. It was all written in, he and she and first names and whatever, and it was really, really unhelpful. And yet this committee was responsible for delivery of a major event. What else have I got here? The chair attends meetings to answer questions, yes. Attendance of the independent chair is additional time impost, which might dissuade people from taking up the role. So again, we're all having trouble. A lot of organisations having trouble getting people joining committees, so you've got to be really careful about the amount of time that you're asking people to commit as well, hence the discussion about 11 finance committees a year, which is way too many. Anything to add on that one, or should we move on?
Move on.
Form of reporting, yep. Form and format of minutes. We need to, as directors, need to know what we're looking at. So I'd set a template that all committees have to report back in the same format. Don't leave it to make it up themselves, because then you need to know who's attending, what the issues were, and what the decisions were. The same for reports as well. The last thing you want to do, I'm a really big one for standardised format of everything, so that I know what I'm looking at, who it's from, what it's about, and what I'm being asked to do. And I think the same should apply to both committee minutes, but preferably if you can get a report as well, identifying the main things.
And one of the things I'd still like to see more committees do is to have a standard heading on there which says strategic issues for board consideration, so that they distill not just the work they're doing, but also looking forward into the future about, look, it could be the Finance Audit Risk Committee, and it could be, look, we're doing really well. The strategic issue is, have we got a lazy balance sheet? Let's talk about that. So it's actually distilling that and looking into the future, and making sure that the board is spending time not just monitoring how busy the committee is, but is talking about the big issues that are worthy of that board's time.
I think too, it's important to add risk into this. And I know, Steve, you see risk as opportunity, and we all should see risk as opportunity, but that both board papers and in committee papers as well. What are the risks and what are the opportunities? Because it's very easy, as we say, just to keep on keeping on doing things as we've always done them, and just thinking of it as a committee report to the board, sort of, that's all we have to do. So I certainly agree with you, strategy and risk to be both included in the formatting of your template for your committee reporting. How are we going, Sean, for time here?
We have another 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. How many slides have we got left?
3 or 4.
Okay. So chairing committees, we've also touched on this, of course. The director chair comes with knowledge of the organisation. The board and fellow directors also comes with pre-existing biases, but is also aware of the time, commitment and workload. The independent chair might find he or she doesn't have enough time, but obviously that needs to be dealt with at the time of appointment. Takes time to settle in and learn the new business. Know a few pre-existing biases, and I think that's one of the really great benefits of having someone from outside the organisation who's capable of then giving, frank and fearless advice to the committee to the board via the committee. So again, fit for purpose. The board chair.
Can I pass on a little anecdote here, just very briefly? One organisation is made up of its directors have to be Indigenous. They have a finance committee. They've appointed an independent chair of the finance committee, and as part of the chair's terms of reference, they have agreed to train up the committee members so they best understand how to deal with finance. Those skills are then transferred back into the board, and that is then transferred back to their various communities as well. So they're actually using the independent chair not only as the chairing, but also as a formal mentor and trainer of high level skills to pass it forward. Great way of dealing with it.
So this slide is on the which we've also touched on, as we are prone to do in these conversations. Touch on things as we go. About the board as ex officio on committees, and I think it's standard, but it's been really incumbent upon the chair not to get him or herself involved in discussions, particularly if a decision is made by the committee, a recommendation to the board that the board ultimately disagrees with, and can put that chair in a very difficult position, and notwithstanding their ex officio status. Things to consider: the needs of business and size of the organisation, the capacity of directors to give additional time. Quite often you see job ads for directors and they say, well, you'll have to sit on 2 or 3 committees. Might be a bit of a turn off. Got to be careful about that. Really think to the opportunity cost and the capacity of the CEO and management to serve and service committees with preparation, attendance, follow-up, all those sorts of things. And for small organisations, that can be a real impost, but not so juggling and deciding what you need according to your resources, etc., is a valuable consideration. And beware that committees comprising directors and management can often blur the line between strategy and operations. And certainly with golf clubs, that's often the case as well. There's a lot of people who are on the Greens committee. The Greens committee wants to report to the board about what's happening with the Greens. Everybody loves to play golf. They like the Greens to be good. So, you can spend a whole lot of time talking about the Greens, which is really a great thing to have, working and operating appropriately, but not to the strategic or big picture business of the board. A good understanding of board meeting effectiveness. So all directors who chair committees don't speak to their reports at board meetings, as we've said. We don't want people reading their reports. Regularly review the charters and performance, wind them up if they're no longer fit for purpose. And this comes to, don't necessarily establish a committee if the work can be done by a working group that is time and task limited. And remember that rewriting a constitution is never a job for a committee. So I've tried that and it does not work. So have we some time for some questions, Sean? Or
we are out of time. So what I thought we'd do is just just round up some of the questions that we haven't answered and just reply those back by way of an email in the next couple of 3 days.
Yep, sure.
Is that okay with everybody?
Sounds good.
Excellent. So please feel free to connect with any of our presenters today via LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll look forward to your connection. We have some great topics of our webinars coming up over the next month or two. The next one on May 9th is helping directors to be more strategic. Steve, I think that is your one that you're running.
I think it might be.
Fantastic. And we have a series of masterclasses. The next one on our schedule is Due Diligence Before Directorship, which is being hosted by Julie Garland-McClellan. I'd also like to bring your attention to an event we are holding in Auckland. It's an invitation event being held on May 9th. So there is the URL there if you would like to join us for that particular evening. It is being hosted by Stephen Bowman and Linda Carroll. There's the QR code there. I think if you scan that, that will take you to the ticketing page as well. So very shortly, you'll receive an email from us, which will include a copy of the video recording today and the presentation slides. And just as you leave the webinar today, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. Go in the draw to win our hamper. We'll announce the winner shortly after the webinar in the next 24 hours. So again, thank you everybody for your attendance. I hope you enjoyed this session with Margot, Linda and Stephen. I know I did. Thanks again to you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, everybody. Have a great day.